almost feel bad saying good morning, Mr. Palmer, because you're sitting there jamming away, chomping on your stroopwafel, eating your breakfast, coffee, whatever. I totally botched that, but anyways, I'm leaving it. How you doing, sir? It's been like a hot minute since we hit record, literally about a minute since we bagged the last episode, but how are you?
Doing good, John. How are you doing?
It is. I'm done with the whole fourth wall thing. It's Friday. We're recording on a Friday, so it's a good day. It's cool here. It was the winter isn't here yet, but it's cold, so I'm okay. Yeah.
And oddly enough, it was actually kind of warm here. Like I woke up this morning and the sun wasn't up yet because we're getting close to time change.
Yep.
And
That's this weekend.
yeah. And it was like 50 degrees outside.
Oh, I hate you. We got your cold weather. It was 35 here this morning.
I like it when it's 35, but earlier this week
I don't mind it, but
earlier this week it was 13 when I woke up. So
But you had the benefit of snow though. You take the good with the bad.
Okay, that's
although snow is really better when you live in like an apartment or a condo and somebody else takes care of the snow. My kids love the snow because they don't clean it. I have a rule. I either want it to be really, really bad so I don't have to worry about doing it really fast and I don't have to go anywhere, or like not at all so that it doesn't screw up my commute.
Yeah.
So anyways, so
what do you
want
want
to
talk
about today?
I was just going to ask you that. Do we have a purpose for hitting record, or are we just gonna...
I think, well, do we ever? But no, seriously.
Touché.
I think we had a topic. You cooked up for us. I don't think we've dropped the episode yet. Maybe by the time they listen to this one, the other one will have dropped.
Yeah. So this is a follow up. Then let's do a follow up to our top unknown or unappreciated or something.
Well, you called it unsung, right? I think you called it unsung.
If I didn't, I should.
I thought you did. And if not, I'm going to give you credit for it anyways. The unsung, unknown, underhyped features and functionality within Ruckus products. And we did an episode on this already. We'll add that link to the show notes as well. Starting the first few of them.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, when we try to keep an episode to about 30 minutes, Jim and I can talk, if you haven't already noticed. And there were a lot of features to get into and discuss. So we didn't get through the whole list. And who knows if we're going to get through the rest of them on this one, which if we don't, then there's just more for another episode. So what do we got?
So a few months ago, I was asked to go to our labs in Sunnyvale and do some work on a question that had come up, and it was mixed channel bandwidth roaming. So if I have one AP at say 80 megahertz wide, what happens if I have a second AP that's 20 megahertz wide, and can I roam between the two of them? The answer is no, but that's not what I want to talk about. What I want to talk about is how hard it was for me to do this testing, because I was using Ruckus APs in the Ruckus lab. I know, go figure. And I had such a hard time testing roaming because BeamFlex works so well in production. And that's the thing is, and I actually had this conversation a couple of days ago as well about how well BeamFlex works, because a lot of people don't understand where BeamFlex actually comes into play and where it doesn't. But because of that, I had a really, really hard time testing roaming in a building that should have needed 5 or 6 APs to cover the entire building. I couldn't do it with less than, or I couldn't do it with more than 3. I tried it with 4 and it never worked. It was terrible. And I was like, man. So in order to do this testing, because I was connected to the AP and I was running some pings and then I was walking around the building, stuff like that. I couldn't test it unless I turned the power all the way down to minimum and only used 3 APs, because BeamFlex was so powerful that my client devices would never roam. I would walk past an AP, where I would normally associate to the AP if I turned my device off and on. And it'd be like, no, BeamFlex got me covered. And so I'm just going to stick with that one in the far back corner that's, a couple 100 feet away. And I'm just like, no, that shouldn't happen. And I had to turn the power all the way down to minimum. I had to turn off APs just to try to get my roaming stuff to work. And I was like, wow, we talk about BeamFlex, but we never talk about like, hey, what is it actually like when you put it in a service and you're using it? And I think even though we talk about it, we don't talk enough about what it means when you're actually trying to make things bad.
No, and I agree. And I mean, we definitely, it's hard to explain. I almost feel like this is when we're in a bind. And I've had this talk with customers before. So we both came from previous environments with non-Ruckus gear. And I used all of the gear that I used in enterprise in my house. It was basically my home lab, and a way for me to fix my home Wi-Fi. I still had some dead spots, not because I did bad Wi-Fi, but because just the nature of home construction, I can't get cables everywhere, and some of the parts of the house just didn't matter. When I got Ruckus gear, I did a simple rip and replace. Nothing special. I didn't move any cables. But I automatically, just by nature of putting in the Ruckus gear, got better coverage. The coverage where I already had good coverage was improved. The coverage that I didn't have, or the spots that I had no coverage in, I had coverage. Literally just by switching to the Ruckus gear. And then the only explanation I have is it's BeamFlex. And it's one of those where it's unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, it's the secret sauce, right? We can't delve too much into the patents and stuff like that. But I'm convinced, and anybody listening can sit there and say, well, you're going to say this because you're the SE on the podcast, you're a Ruckus employee. I'm convinced out now that anybody who says BeamFlex is hot air or whatever, they've never had the benefit of actually using BeamFlex AP. They've never worked on one. They've never played with one, especially the current gen stuff. I'm convinced that there are people that don't, they've never used it, so they hate on it or whatever. It's just, it has to be experienced to be believed, I think.
And my introduction of it was Black Hat in 2019 when Mo Williams told me, hey, go deploy these APs at these locations. And I get there and I'm like, where do I do it? She's like, oh, just throw it up on a shelf, put it on a table, and I come back to her and I'm like, this is never going to work. And she's like, just trust me on this one. I'm like, no, this is never going to work. It's just not. And everybody at the end of the show, everybody was like, oh, wow, this is amazing Wi-Fi. And I'm like, how in the hell did that happen? Because based on everything I know, it's like that should not have happened. And so it is I think it's one of those things. And I think this is why that's one of the efforts I'm working on is getting APs into people's hands to kind of, do this, what is the power of BeamFlex when you actually go to use it? Because too many times people think it's Beam for me and it's not. I'll post a link to Victor Strom's Wireless Field Day 2 presentation, which is really good. And it kind of goes into why it matters and why it works. So it's just, again, it's one of those unsung things where we sing about it, but we don't sing about the, implications as much.
Yeah. And as much as I'm trying to let our newer talks do better on the metrics, there is one of the first episodes of the entire show was about BeamFlex and did really, really well. We can put the link in the show notes, and perhaps we can find somebody in the company that might want to come on and talk specifically a little bit more about BeamFlex, because it's, for me as an SE, it's something that I know it works and I'm asking people to trust me, but it's really hard to completely, without sounding like I'm full of it can be a challenge to explain, and I get the skepticism. It sounds like marketing on a box, but it really isn't. I mean, this is when I say this is the secret sauce for Ruckus, this really is one of the things that goes into the Ruckus APs that makes them so special and allows them to do so well in so many crazy environments like LPV, like high density, et cetera, and so forth. And without getting too much into your testing, unless you want to, I remember being on the phone, like you and I were talking at like 10 o'clock at night, my time. So it was a little bit earlier for you because you were on the West Coast. But we talked at night, like 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, whatever it was, because it was driving you nuts because it wasn't behaving the way you had expected it to behave because it wasn't letting your device roam. but not
Yep.
for the reasons that we're used to, for different reasons, and you had to get around it, which is, it didn't want to let you fail, which is kind of funny.
Yeah. So now that we beat that horse, I want to talk about something else.
Effects for that one.
Yeah,
sure. But and again, as we do often with this one, this is a topic that we could definitely go into. We might have to do a 2024 edition of what does BeamFlex mean for us, and so stay tuned for that. So what do we got after BeamFlex, Jim? We've got. Let me look at the list. I'll read one here. What do you want to do? You go a couple different ways. You want to do Wi-Fi calling?
Let's talk about Wi-Fi calling, because I actually had to ask you about this one.
Yeah, and to show you how much I know and how much I don't use it, you asked me, and like, you're talking about like the little toggle switch in the settings, and you're like, no, it's something even better.
So Wi-Fi calling is a thing, right? I mean, and I'll name them, but it's something that T-Mobile has been doing. I think they were one of the first ones to actually do, like where they promoted Wi-Fi calling. I remember a long time ago, I went to my buddy's house. It was way out in the middle of the woods, in the middle of nowhere. And he's like, you're not going to have cell service. And so I was like, why? And he goes, well, because there is just no cell service where I live. He's like, I have a little femto cell from my cell carrier. He's like, but since you're not on that cell carrier, he goes, it's never going to work. I was like, well, you got Wi-Fi? And he's like, well, yeah. And I said, well, I'm fine. And it kind of surprised him that I was like, oh yeah, I just connected the Wi-Fi. And then all of a sudden, all my cell phone features worked because it was Wi-Fi calling. But what I want to talk about specifically is something that I've done with Ruckus, and I'm not sure if other vendors have done it, because I don't remember. And this is what I asked you about. Is within Ruckus, yeah, there's a little toggle for Wi-Fi calling, but then you go into the controller, and it's so much easier. And actually, our buddy Sharon has a blog about this. This is actually where I get all my configuration information, is from Sharon's blog about setting up Wi-Fi calling on Ruckus, because not only do you enable it and turn it on, you also have the ability to go in and define the EPDG for your cell carrier. And so when the network sees a packet destined for an EPDG that's in its list of potential, and an EPDG is an evolved packet destination gateway or something, or I could look it up, but that sounds like work. And it's what the cell carriers use. And so what happens is, by entering that stuff in, then the network knows, hey, this is a Wi-Fi call. And you can actually go in and look in the stats, and you can find out, hey, how are my Wi-Fi calls actually functioning, and how many of them, and what's going on in and I don't remember that in any other platform I've ever worked on. It might be there now, but it's actually kind of a cool little thing, because then you get all of the QoS, and all this other stuff is then magically taken care of for you, that you don't have to manually set up. You put in the EPDG, you say, hey, this is what I'm doing. And the network takes care of all the work for you after that. And it's so easy.
So, I mean, I really have nothing to add. It's not a feature that I've used personally. And when you actually asked me about it, I was kind of, I learned something new, and I thought it was a really awesome feature, and it made the list.
So yeah, we'll add a link to, this one, we're gonna have lots of links in this one, but I'll add a link to Sharon's blog about setting this up. But again, it's super simple, it's easy, and then you can actually go find, like, hey, how much of my traffic is Wi-Fi calling, and then the network handles the prioritization for you to make sure that it works.
There you go. So look for that link. Moving on, trying to be a little bit efficient with the time, right?
Yeah, sure, why not?
This is one I've used a little bit. I haven't done a ton with it. I haven't needed to at this point, but troubleshooting page in the Smart Zone controller.
I love this page.
I do. I agree.
And here's the thing. It's also in Unleashed,
which is nice.
Most people don't know that.
The beauty part of that is, right, like, and we talked about this on the prior podcast about the features, right? The fact that any AP can easily run Unleashed, standalone, Ruckus One, or Smart Zone is great. The fact that something like this is in the Smart Zone and you're leaning into it as a cool feature, but it's also an Unleashed, which is free, right?
Yeah.
So you're getting a really cool feature. And the nice thing is, well, Jim, what's the nice thing? Why do you love it so much?
Well, because it actually draws a graph for you of, you know, so especially on association. Association is always like the biggest problem, right? And it's like, why is my device having problems associating? Why is there problems? Why is there stuff like that? And so you basically, it's a GUI driven tool. You go in and you say, hey, I'm interested to know in this client device MAC address and how, you know, what happens when it associates. And it actually draws a graph or a map, and it says, oh, you know, here's the association frame, here's the authentication, here's the association, here's the, you know, creating the PSK, you know, or the four-way handshake. You know, it's like, here's the four-way handshake if you're using, or if you're doing .1x, it's like, here's the radius authentication messages, and we see a message going out, but we don't see that message coming back. And you can get that information other ways, but it's really nice and easy if you can just go, oh, look, here's the picture of it. And it was funny because I first shared this with Roel Dionisio a few years ago. And he was like, oh, it'd be really cool if there was like a timestamp. So I knew, like, and I was like, oh, you mean like this little number that's a timestamp? And he's like, oh, I didn't see that. He's like, this is so awesome. This is so cool. But, you know, it allows you to know, like, we were troubleshooting a problem and we weren't getting the third frame back, or the third packet back from the radius authentication server. We would get the first one back from it, but, you know, because we'd send it, we'd get a response, we'd send it, we never got the response back again. And so it'd be like, okay, we know we're sending it, but we're never getting anything back. You can find it in the logs, in the debug logs, but it's so much, that's a kind of a pain in the butt to go find and figure out. But, you know, you throw it you put it in the troubleshooter, and it just goes ahead and says, oh yeah, let me handle this for you, and give you a little fancy map. You know, same thing with the HCP. And so it's a really quick and easy way to kind of figure out, hey, what is happening? What is, you know, what's not happening? And then how do because you can test client connection, you can do spectrum analysis, you can do tunnel monitoring and diagnostics, and you can do AP packet captures using the troubleshooting tool. And it's just a little, you know, it's a menu thing. You click on it, you go into it, you pick which ones you want to do, and then you run with it.
And I don't think you mentioned it, but there is actually also the ability, and it's not necessarily on that page, but one of the things I've used before, not recently, but in the past, was the speed test. You have the ability to speed test from the controller to the AP, which is nice.
And if you enable it,
it's not automatically enabled, which, you know, you've got to do a little work, which isn't bad.
If you enable it, there's an app you can put on your phone that enables you to speed test between your phone and the AP. So you can actually, so because, you know, it's the same question about, like, oh, well, like, what speeds do I have, you know, just between my, you know, and you can run a TCP test or a UDP test, and you can define it, and there's some settings on your phone, but it has to be enabled on the AP. Then you can actually run it. So, like, on a Mac, we can kind of look at our MCS rates. We can see that information thanks to Adrian and Wi-Fi Signal, Adrian Granados and Wi-Fi Signal. We can see that stuff, but on some phones and other devices, it's really hard to figure that out. But if you put it's called SpeedFlex. So I will add a link to that. You put a SpeedFlex app on your phone and you enable it on the AP, where you enable the speed test. You can test between your phone and the AP. You don't have, and it doesn't go to the wire. It's just basically between just testing the wireless link.
Yeah. So again, it's there. It's sort of, you know, obscure maybe, but it's worth using. It's again, it's not talked about enough, I don't think. It comes in handy. Even if you use it once or twice to save your bacon, that's plenty of times and it makes it worthwhile.
Yeah, but again, it's one of those things where you're not going to use it all the time, every time. It's not like, it's not my go-to thing.
And I'm willing to bet that there are plenty of people that are listening and goes, oh, I knew about that. And there's going to be at least one person for every one of these that we've gone over that goes, really? I've been using this for this long and I've never known that. Well, mission accomplished.
That's the whole point of this episode.
Exactly.
It's not to help the masses. It's to help the few people that be like, oh wow, I didn't know about that.
Yeah.
So
Well, hey, I mean, come on, we're the hosts, and there's stuff on here that
And half the stuff we didn't know
some of us
about. So
didn't know.
yeah.
So go figure. So last on the list, the built-in Zigbee radios in the AP that pair with the VRiot and Insight controllers and servers.
Well, so that one's.
I think people
It's
overlooked
not.
this one.
And we did we did an episode about the story I had with my next door, my neighbor across the street. He's not next door; he's across the street.
We did. Howdy, because he's a listener, right?
I don't
Isn't he a
know
listener?
if not, I'll have to make fun of him.
There you go. Well,
not
maybe
until
he's a
after
listener.
not until after he 3D prints my case for me. But anyway, we talked about it, but it's something that I wanted to kind of focus back on for a little bit at a higher level, I guess, or a bigger thing, because too many times, we see AP vendors who say we have IoT, and everybody goes, great, you support IoT, and then nobody ever does anything with it, because it's like, well, what do I do with it? We don't know. It's, because for the most part, it's like, what is IoT? IoT is BLE. But for most users, they go, but it's actually a lot more than that. And that's something I wanted to kind of talk about a little bit more was, most of the APs that we've come out with, starting with 11AX and our, so that'd be like the R 850, 750, 650, 550, 350 doesn't have it, but they have built-in IoT radios. And depending on the model, it's either selectable, where you can actually toggle between having a BLE or a Zigbee. And as we talked with Tofu about the R770, it's now also supporting Thread and Matter as well.
Right.
So
I thought, was it one of the newer ones? I thought there was one. I could be wrong. And I'm going to look like an idiot, but I wake up every day and I look like an idiot. So I'm okay with that. But I thought that we were moving to where you weren't going to have to choose. I thought we were adding a second radio.
Depending on the model, there are some,
yes.
Depending on the model, there are some that are dual concurrent. So you could actually run, a BLE and a Zigbee. And there's also different modes of it. I didn't even know that there were different modes until I was looking in the
BLE is, or not even BLE, but like the IoT radios, it's a rabbit hole that you could go down for a long time. And, fun fact, like you and I have tried, when we talked about the deep dives in another episode about WLPC, we tried to actually come up with a really good presentation for a deep dive class at WLPC surrounding our IoT offering, because it really is compelling. It's really cool. I've seen some demos at trade shows. We have a nice offering. It's hard to translate that to a lab that's going to be engaging for 15 to 20 people at a conference for a couple of days. But there's so much involved. There's so much different technology. And what even drove me nuts, because I was looking at it for the house, is like, you've got sensors, you've got door locks, we've got IoT enabled like refrigerators and other appliances, air conditioning now. Like the list is like incredibly long, extensive. There's not much you can't get that isn't IoT enabled or capable. The problem is you've got Zigbee, you've got Bluetooth, you've got Matter, you've got Thread, or like I'm probably
D-Wave.
Thank you. Like there's all these different, there's not a standard. I mean, I think there's HomeLink. I don't know if that's Apple. No, HomeKit is Apple's. I mean, there's a whole bunch. Samsung has a nice ecosystem, but what we're trying to do with VRiot and with Insights is to create a sort of, I don't want to call it vendor neutral, but more vendor agnostic. It's really hard to do because there's a lot of different moving parts, but try to get a centralized spot for a lot of things to work in that makes it easier. And we do, I think, a good job. I can't speak to it because unfortunately none of my clients really get into the IoT space, but what's cool, we've had at least a conversation or two about it. And they're always like, what do I need to do? What do we need to add? I'm like, well, you already have it. Like you already have the radios deployed. Obviously they might not have the VRiot Insights done, but like if they've got, like you said, if they've got the right APs out there, they've already got the radios deployed for BLE or for Zigbee. So they don't have to do as much.
So I'm going to going to throw a couple disclaimers in here. The
Sure.
problem we had with doing the IoT stuff for WLPC was not that we didn't have a compelling one. Is how do we do it on a budget, or how do we do it with 20 students in a class? I mean, it had nothing to do about the technology, or could we make a compelling lab, or could we do it? It was literally, it came down to how can we do it on a budget, because it was like trying to get all of the IoT gadgets, and then trying to get, and then it became a question of having the APs, which we get the APs, but then you're having 20 APs in a room, which it
Not going to
is
work well.
it becomes problematic.
Yeah.
So
it was a cool idea. It just logistically, like Jim said, it wasn't a technical issue. It was a logistical issue.
it was all logistics. So we'll go with that. And then the vendor agnostic ecosphere thing or no. What I was going to talk about was what the one piece they're missing is the hub, right? Because a lot of these, it's like, yeah, we can act as relays. We can do all this other stuff, but what we're missing is this hub. Where do we send all these connections to, then we can manage and monitor it? And that's where the servers come in, is to act as that hub, and then to do the MQTT brokers and all the other fun stuff. And so, but like I said, the thing that I think we don't talk enough about is the fact that we always talk about IoT and the APs, but we never talk about like, what do you do with it? Because you talked about the refrigerator. More than likely, I mean, even though that's IoT, it's probably a 2.4 gigahertz radio, but using the power of like DPSK, because let's be honest, your refrigerator is not running WPA3. So WPA2 personal is probably all you're going to get out of your refrigerator. But if you use DPSK, you can then assign it to the same VLAN or as your other IoT stuff, or you can then start segmenting all your stuff. And so it's not so much that we have these built-in radios that will do Zigbee and BLE or BLE, depending on your AP model. It's not that we have them. It's that we have them, but we don't talk about what comes next. What's that next step in making this become a feature that's cool in an AP to something that can benefit your organization? And so I think that's really kind of, one of the things that is really unsung is being able to manage that stuff, secure it, make sure that, hey, what is on my network? I can blacklist IoT stuff. I can blacklist a Zigbee or a Z-Wave. Use a Z-Wave dongle, then all of a sudden your APs become Zigbee and Z-Wave at the same time, which is quite honestly kind of cool. But being able to blacklist it and be like, oh yeah, somebody stole my IoT radio, let me blacklist it to where it will never join my network. That's something that most organizations struggle with from a security standpoint. And by offering that solution, we can overcome those objections, and being able to actually provide an IoT network into an organization that then becomes functional and useful.
Yeah. I mean, and I'll say this about that. Like I've known about things, right? I've known about the IoT. It's part of our ecosystem, right? But so I was at a conference last year, not a WLPC conference, but I was at a conference last trade show, call it, with our managed services folks, and Jay had an IoT demo set up, and his was simple. It was like a water sensor. He just dunked it in a puddle, a bowl of water, and it set off a light bulb. But that part was cool. I mean, you show the functionality of it, but he had insights running to be able to show like the different apartments and how they were segregated and how they each had their own little ecosystems for the IoT, and door locks are big, whether you're talking about like a dorm or an apartment building, and apparently, as I've been told, and I've been hearing it on these tours, a lot of the colleges now, I used to think it was all about higher learning. Not anymore. It's all about the facilities. They want to show you that, like, when you get to the upperclassmen housing or even some of the newer dorms now, like they've got like IoT enabled. They come in and they've got like, it's a smart home. 18-year-old kids going away from home on a smart home. I don't even have a smart home at home. But it's really, it's a value add for them, and not even a value add, but it's a competitive advantage, I think. But seeing insights is what kind of really blew my mind, because that was the missing piece. Like VRiot's cool. It gets everything working, but Insights lets you see it. And that's just,
So
yeah.
VRiot sells it to the security team.
Yes.
Insights sells it to the executives. I mean, because let's be honest, that's where you get the pretty maps. But VRiot is where it allows the network team and a security team to help, to sort of manage this whole ecosphere. And then Insights is where it allows you to, actually do the monitoring and understanding what's happening. So they go together. But it sort of completes the picture, and it completes the story of having, IoT in our APs. Because again, it's not that we have them. That's not new. That's something everybody talks about because it's on the spec sheet. But it's not, it allows us to complete the story as opposed to just saying, oh, we have it, but it's totally up to the customer to figure out what they're going to do with it. And that's what I think is the unsung hero of the IoT story is VRiot and Insights.
No, I agree. And I think, unless you've got something hidden, that's the list for now. Subject to change, always subject for a future follow-up episode.
Well, here's a thing I'll throw out to the listeners. If there's a feature or a function that you think that is unsung and unheralded in the Ruckus ecosphere, send us an email, ruckcast@comscope.com. And, maybe we talk about it on, we crowdsource the next episode that discusses the unsung features of Ruckus.
Yeah, no, agreed. It's, we just we had a talk the other day with a fellow SE from Europe talking about, and I'm not going to give it away because the topic will go live shortly. But talking about something that he's out there doing on his own time to make his life easier, that he shared with the world, basically, that anybody's using Ruckus. And I don't think people talk about it enough. And hopefully the podcast sheds light on that. But yeah, if there's something you use that maybe we don't talk about, let us know. We'll do a focus episode on it. We can, we've got friends in high places here. I'm rolling my eyes. Nobody can hear that, but we're happy to talk about whatever. And please use the email. I think right now most of what we get is, I think I just deleted a couple more that were asking us if we wanted some attendee lists from some trade shows that I've never even heard of. So please send us an email. Tell us you like the show. Tell us what you don't like about the show. Tell us what you want to hear us talk about next. If we can talk about it, we'll gladly do it. And if we can bring on somebody who can make us sound even smarter, why not?
Right. So
on that note, I have nothing else for you, Mr. Palmer.
Nope.
I think it's time to hit the outro music.
Yep. It's been fun.
Always. And we'll catch you guys on the next episode.
See ya.
If you want to contact the show directly, you can email us using the address ruckcast@comscope.com. To learn more about Ruckus products and services that we may have talked about on this or any other podcast, please check the links in the About section of the show.